if we briefly expose you to that kind of stress while you're exercising, and then as soon as you hit that point, we switch over and you breathe pure oxygen. What we're doing is we're telling the cells, like, you better get ready to handle hypoxia. Any of you who are even slightly weak, get out of Dodge. You're going to die and be replaced by a young, healthy, strong cell.
Well said. Well, and one of the, we share that. I remember my university education, I found that a very compartmentalized component, but there was no synergy between these opposing departments, even though there's obvious synergy within the body. Which leads me to my next it's more of a hacking question, because I was over to the labs the other day. They just closed down Gold's Gym again.
Yeah, well, they went bankrupt too.
Yeah, so totally devastated. And I'm like, well, what new training modality could I implement? Because we've got to, be adaptable during this component. And looks like Bulletproof Labs is going to be able to stay open. And they shared with me that you were talking about the CVAC with an oxygen program combination. So there's training with oxygen, super saturated and depletion. I don't want to steal your time. Can you explain? And I said, well, Dave said, you've got to do both. Yep. Going on this. So I would like for you to explain the name of the technology, what you're suggesting to do, and then how to get the best results, because I would like to go do that experiment, because I lift weights a lot, but now I can't lift weights at the gym. So I'm like, hey, let's try this thing.
Got it. So if you go into Upgrade Labs, and right now we are still open because we're not a gym, we're a recovery facility where people are going to become more resilient. And we actually have never been a gym. That exercise is not the point there. It's more rapid recovery. And I mean, human stress recovery, not, medical recovery of stuff. And what happens in this thing called the atmospheric cell trainer, which is manufactured for us by CVAC, as you mentioned, the air pressure gets changed, and it's changed relatively rapidly. And instead of more pressure, which is what hyperbaric is, it actually can take you as high as Mount Everest. And it's exercising your cells by changing them so they get big, small, big, small, big, small, with different patterns. And it has all kinds of cellular benefits, nitric oxide benefits, circulatory benefits that are truly systemic. And that is, I think, a very important technology for people who are recovering from any kind of thing that put a stress on their cardiovascular system, on their arteries, or just anytime your cells aren't working very well. So we're talking about people who've already recovered from any kind of toxic mold exposure, a virus, a bacteria, and anything like that, mercury poisoning, whatever. And so like, okay, I've gotten rid of whatever the problem was, but I still don't feel like myself. How do I make my cells back to the way they were? This is a really cool tech, and it's very unusual. It's actually quite an expensive piece of equipment because it uses the same seals that SpaceX uses for, stuff they're sending into space, because you wouldn't want to be at the height of Mount Everest and have a leak, right? And then the other thing that we do is called intermittent hypoxic training there. And intermittent hypoxic training is interesting. On that, you get on an exercise bike and you breathe air that has no oxygen in it. And you're saying, what? Well, when you do that, you can reliably, as you'd expect, drop your blood oxygen levels down to a pretty low amount. So sometimes we target in the high 80s. Normally, you're pretty much going to go to the ICU if you're below 90. In fact, a lot of people are using pulse oximeters now with COVID, because if COVID damages your hemoglobin and all, you can be walking around and you're at 90% blood oxygen, you should be at 98 or 99. And so that's a good sign that you need to go to the hospital. Do not go anywhere else because there's a problem. Well, what we're doing is we're taking people who have nothing to do with COVID, healthy people, and we're saying, well, if we briefly expose you to that kind of stress while you're exercising, and then as soon as you hit that point, we switch over and you breathe pure oxygen. What we're doing is we're telling the cells, like, you better get ready to handle hypoxia. Any of you who are even slightly weak, get out of Dodge. You're going to die and be replaced by a young, healthy, strong cell. So it's very much like weightlifting for the oxygen system of your body. And I think that's just fundamental. This is tied to those B Strong bands I mentioned earlier for blood flow restriction. But exposing yourself to this triggers a compound called HIF-1 alpha, hypoxic inducible factor 1 alpha. And it turns out there's a few other things that do that. Infrared saunas or any sauna will raise HIF-1 alpha levels. Exercise to a certain extent will, but there's nothing like briefly going into hypoxia and then coming back. And I know so much about this because I actually used to do high altitude mountaineering. And when you have toxic mold poisoning and chronic fatigue syndrome, like I did have when I weighed 300 pounds, you have something called pseudohypoxia throughout your body. A lot of that musculoskeletal pain comes from a lack of blood circulation, or you actually are getting blood there, but the cells can't use oxygen because the cellular machinery itself isn't working right. And a lot of my work has been, hey, how do I fix that cellular machinery so that it works right? And now that it works, how do I make it stronger than Mother Nature intended? This is very different from going up to high altitude to train high and live low, or train low, live high, whatever the people did in the 90s. You don't really need to do that. What you need is brief exposure to hypoxic environments. And we can do that. And we can do that at Upgrade Labs, where you come in, you hop on the bike, you do it, you will sweat. It is a serious workout. It's one of the few things that actually makes you sweat there. And it's not meant to be a body workout at all. It's a cellular workout so that you recover faster and better from everything. So I've got that downstairs. And the combination of those two, I think, is fundamental to having really strong arterial performance, which is going to help you with one of the 4 big causes of aging. There's another tech you can use called pulse wave analysis, which is a reliable indicator of how healthy your cardiovascular system is. And you can plot how flexible your arteries are based on a curve on your age. According to the data, my arteries are 27 years old. Okay, it's roughly half my age. And it varies on a day-to-day basis, plus or minus 3 or 4 years, just depending on individual variations. So I've actually hit where they're exactly 50% of my age. So I'm like, all right, that's pretty solid. I think something I'm doing is working, especially given that I have the genes. It's a company called the DNA Company that I've been working with for a while on functional genomics. And they looked and like, Dave, you have the cardiovascular risk genes. You're in the 7% highest risk. I'm like, yet I have the youngest arteries. That's pretty crazy. What's going on there? I'm pretty sure this intermittent hypoxic training, the atmospheric cell training from Upgrade Labs, as well as the bulletproof diet, as well as appropriate supplements, including I take some of the things that you guys make. It's really important. And you stack all that stuff up, which one mattered? It's a dumb question, but that's the question that every $100 million study out there tries to answer. And it's the same question that all the supplement critics, the people who usually are criticizing it because of either their ego or because of who's paying them, they will criticize and say, well, that one doesn't do anything, knowing full well that of course it doesn't.
What's the time frame to get a positive adaptive response using that technology? What do you feel is
you will see changes in the very first time. If you walk out of the atmospheric cell trainer, usually you feel a little bit euphoric and you feel really good. It's changing your nitric oxide levels in a positive way, sometimes even in the very, very first session. And if you do, say, 10 sessions on that, it's transformative. And I like to see people do at least 10 sessions on it over the course of a week or two. You compare that with something like hyperbaric oxygen. It takes 40 sessions of that in order to really, you'll feel it earlier than that, but 40 sessions is kind of therapeutic. And I've seen with intermittent hypoxic training, if you do it every day for 15 days, you'll be pretty much acclimated to a very high altitude. You'll have an oxygen carrying system that's amazing. And that should stick around for about a month. And if you do it maybe once a week, after that, you'll just consistently maintain this level of superhuman oxygen processing that it's invisible, except you feel it all the time.